David Clark, a former lecturer at Fareham College, has just published a set of 2 books, The Bierton Strict and Particular Baptists, and The Bierton Crisis. He is the sole survivor and remaining member of the church that once worshipped in the Bierton Baptist Chapel in a small village near Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire. He moved to Fareham in 1988, after the difficulties that he encountered as a member of the church. He taught electronics at Fareham College until 2001, and then conducted extensive missionary work in the jails of the Philippines, as the director of an international incorporation called Trojan Horse International. Bierton is a small village near Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire. These books tell David's own story about his former criminal life and conversion to Christ during a bad experience on an LSD trip on the 16th of January 1970. He tells of his experience in seeking to follow Christ and joining the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptists in 1976. He then goes on to tell about his subsequent call by the Lord to preach the gospel and his ordination as a minister. This included being sent by the church to preach wherever the Lord opened the door. The Bierton church was closed for worship in December 2002 and the chapel was sold. He preached in many churches throughout England until he seceded from the Bierton church in 1984. David wrote an account of his secession in his first book entitled The Bierton Crisis 1984, in which he explained the reason for his secession, which was over matters of conscience. This book was circulated to all the church trustees and the various churches where he had preached and to all were concerned. It was 18 years later, in December 2002, that one of the last church members of the Bierton church died, leaving Mr. King, the only other seceding church member and trustee, with the problem of dealing with a chapel that was serving no purpose. This was when trouble began, because the title deed of the chapel had been given to the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited to act as trustees who had not been elected by the church. They later refused permission to David to reopen the chapel. David realized that there was a problem, and now says that it was like a reenactment of the story about the wicked husbandman in the Bible. This told of certain men that were given responsibility to look after a vineyard that had been planted by its owner. The owner went off to a far country when the time of the fruit came near. Then things got messy. The husbandman refused to give the fruits up to the servants of its owner. They eventually killed the son of the owner, thinking they would seize on his inheritance. Matthew 21 verse 33 onwards. Could this happen today? The Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited is likened to these wicked husbandmen in this true story told by David Clark. David became a member of the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptist Church in 1976, and in 1982 was called by the Lord and sent by the church to preach the gospel. During the following years, David contended with the church over their false teaching and practices, all of which were contrary to the Bible, their church's articles of religion and rules of practice. As a result, in 1984, David seceded from the church over matters of conscience. It was 17 years later, in 2001, that David went on a Christian mission to the Philippines, preaching the gospel in the prisons. That was the result of his brother Michael becoming a Christian whilst serving a prison sentence of 16 years in New Bilibid prison. It was this event that prompted David to publish his second book, Converted on LSD Trip, which is his own story of conversion from crime to Christ and that of his brother, with a view to help out others to avoid the trap of drugs and crime. David was at time a lecturer, teaching at Fareham College, and he learned of a drug problem in Stubbington village, which was where he lived. In order to highlight the problem and bring it to the attention of those who could help, he made a documentary video of the drug problem among the young people in the village. Sadly, shortly afterwards, 2 of his close friends, one was a former student at Fareham College and was a drug dealer in the village who David was trying to help, died from heroin overdoses before any help was realized. The series of videos are on YouTube called Stubbington Village, A Drug Problem 1. Also Stubbington Village, A Drug Problem 10 years on. David went to the Philippines on mission work, intending to return so he could do something towards helping with the drug and crime problem in Stubbington. Whilst David was in the Philippines, he and his brother Michael founded a non-profit mission organization called Trojan Horse International, Tulip, Phils, Incorporated, with the Bierton Strict Baptist and Particular Baptist Articles of Religion as their doctrinal basis. This was to continue their Christian mission work in the jails of the Philippines, and the continuing ministry of David, who had been sent by the Bierton Church in 1982. The story is written in David and Michael's book, Trojan Warriors. A brief history and story of the Trojan Horse International mission is available as a video on our website, trojanhorseinternational.com. In December 2002, David baptized 22 inmates in Baguio City Jail and 9 inmates in Benguet Provincial Jail, also Karina Bassoon of Baguio City in early 2003, all of whom had become Christians and wished to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. He also baptized Dolores Nava from Muntinlupa City and Alan Nielsen from the UK. This was the continuing proof of the ministry that David had been commissioned with when sent to preach by the Bierton Church in 1982. In December 2002, one of the last church members of the Bierton Church died, leaving Mr. King, who too was a seceding member of the church and trustee with the responsibility of dealing with the Bierton Chapel. It was Mr. King who opposed the teaching of particular redemption and withdrew from church membership because his teaching was called into question. This is recorded in the Bierton Crisis, Chapter 1 under the heading Truth Causes Division. In January 2003, David wrote to Mr. Jane, one of the Bierton Church's trustees, informing him of the Christian mission work being done by him in the Philippines and requested confirmation for the Philippine authorities regarding his membership of the Bierton Church. It cannot be said the trustees were unaware of the ministry being conducted by David in the Philippines. In Mr. Jane's reply in March 2003, no mention was made of the death of the remaining church member or of their actions of giving the Bierton trust deed and land title documents to the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited. In December 2002, the association had hastily set out to sell the chapel. This was against the rules of the Charities Commission, as a period of 2 years should have been left so that any rightful persons who had an interest in the chapel could take any appropriate steps. David also learned that the remaining trustees, Mr. Jane, Mr. Bomba, Mr. Tim Martin and Mr. King, no longer held to or supported the Bierton Church in her association with the Gospel Standard Baptists, but held to those beliefs of the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited. On David's return to the UK in 2003, Mr. Crane, the Bierton Church overseer, suggested to David that he return and reopen the Bierton Chapel. When David asked the Association of Grace Baptist Limited to make use of the chapel for the purpose it was intended, they refused. On making further enquiries, it was noted by David that the chapel had been stripped of all its furniture and all internal walls knocked down. The association had applied for planning permission, wishing to convert it to a 3-bedroom domestic dwelling, and then sell the chapel at a profit. After further communications with the association, David Whitemarsh, the secretary, suggested that David place a bid with an offer to buy the chapel for a sum of over £150,000. It was then that David sent the association a copy of his first book, The Bierton Crisis 1984, that clearly showed his involvement and just claim to use the chapel. To their shame, they not only denied that the Bierton Church was a gospel standard cause but also that his membership was invalid. After many months of protracted communications with the association, they refused to give him a copy of the Bierton Church trust deed, on the basis that it was too fragile to photocopy it. Providentially, David had a copy of the original deed to refer to. The trust deed rightly defines who are the lawful church members and its trustees. The association did not qualify to be the lawful trustees because the church did not elect them to this position, and by default David was the sole remaining member. That same year, in May 2005, Michael died in prison in the Philippines from tuberculosis. Before their vision of bringing great relief and help to many in the Philippines was realized, a request was made by David to the association to open the doors of the chapel, as he wished to hold a memorial service in thanksgiving to God for the work done in Michael in his conversion from crime to Christ. The association refused this request, so David, along with friends and family, held the meeting outside in the Bierton Chapel Cemetery and placed a memorial tombstone in memory of his deceased brother, with the epitaph "The First Trojan Warrior" written on the tombstone, and also, "He being dead yet speaketh." In attendance at that meeting was Mr. Milland Hughes, a Christian, and the most senior probation officer in Aylesbury, who in the 60s had the responsibility of watching over both Michael and David, whilst they were on probation on their release from prison at that time. To prevent the association from selling the Bierton Chapel, David registered a legal charge with the land registry against first registration of the Bierton Chapel in 2005. The association continued to deny that David was a Bierton church member, and they refused to surrender the Bierton trust deed to a third-party solicitor. The association denied David's claim to membership before the London Central County Court judge on the 6th of September 2006. After this, David ceased from any further dealings with the association. Had David proceeded in his claim, he would have proved that the association had taken the deeds inappropriately. Also, if they then went on to claim the chapel as their own and sell it, they would then have been culpable and have committed a further crime. The association went on to claim costs from David of £6,000, an amount which David knew to be extortionate. He did not know at that time how to have such a bill taxed. When David requested the association to reduce the bill, or even waive the charge, due to the fact that he had become seriously ill due to the stress this whole matter had caused him, and now had no income, they refused to do so and he had to pay the amount in full. David then removed the charge against first registration, leaving the association to do what it wished. The Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited registered the Bierton property with the land registry as a first registration. This was done in their name and they have now sold the chapel. It is now a domestic dwelling place, with all the former church member tombstones removed, including the recently erected monumental stone of Michael Clark, and they have all been discarded. When David requested that his Trojan Horse Incorporation ministry benefit financially from the Bierton Trust Fund, he was ignored. David and Michael had neither sought nor asked funds from anyone in the past, believing that the Lord provided for his work. However, David felt the sale funds of the Bierton Chapel was a provision not to be ignored, as David and Michael had spent over £40,000 of their own personal money on their mission work in the Philippines. David says that he believes, and feels, that the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited have behaved less than gracious in this matter, and have not been faithful stewards in looking after the Bierton Trust. They have robbed him of his lawful inheritance, as he is the sole survivor of the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptist Church. So this David, the chief of sinners, says the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited have behaved like thieves and robbers. He says that there is a reference in the New Testament about men who are robbers of churches, Acts 19 verse 37. This association are such men. In September 2011, David published a second edition of his book Converted on LSD Trip, and as a result he has been asked to tell his story at the Holy Rood Church in Stubbington on the 3rd of March 2012. This is at 9:30 AM and is of the Men's Fellowship. David would invite you all, but it is limited to men only and over 18s. However, please send word to David via www.trojanhorseinternational.com as he would like to arrange the same talk in Stubbington, maybe the Red Lion, for a breakfast one morning to which all are invited. Contact David Clark 0771899345. A further book sign-in is also planned at the Britannia pub in Aylesbury. This is because in Michael's last will and testament he wanted his story to be told, and this is where Michael and David were brought up. This will be done, says David, with or without a chapel, as he is full well aware that the pub is as good as a chapel. For God does not dwell in buildings or temples made by man's hands, but rather he is pleased to dwell in the hearts of men, wherever they may be. David's business is to persuade criminals to turn from drugs and crime and follow Christ. This is because Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom he was chief. David's mission remains the same as it was given him on the night of his conversion on the 16th of January 1970. Jesus said to him, "All you can do is tell them the way." At one time David would have employed a debt collector to recover the title deeds of the Bierton Chapel, but now he seeks to work within the law. He would rather the association repent of their sins and cease from their antinomian behavior. Then they will know what is their duty to do, which is to return in full the proceeds of the chapel sale and the church books, along with the £6,000 they took from him. David would like the readers of the News and the Bucks Herald to come and hear his story and let them to be the judge and jury of the whole matter.